The morning alarm echoed through the metal corridors of Station 7, waking thousands of cadets from dozens of different worlds. The sound was designed to be heard by every species in the Galactic Defense Academy, from the high-frequency chirps that the bird-like needed to the deep bass notes that vibrated through the bone dents. Rolled out of his narrow bunk and stretched, the human quarters were smaller than most others on the station. Humans were still new to galactic society, and nobody quite knew what to do with them yet. The other species got rooms built for their specific needs. They had tall perches and wind tunnels. The aquatic deepers had water-filled chambers. They had reinforced floors that could hold their massive weight. Humans got basic metal boxes with basic furniture. It was fine by. He had slept in worse places during his time in Earth's Special Forces. Pulled on his training uniform and walked to the cafeteria. The hallways were wide enough for even the largest species to move around easily. He passed a group of warriors, their chitinous armor gleaming under the artificial lights. They were tall and impressive, standing over 7 feet with natural armor plating that could stop most small arms fire. One of them glanced down as he passed. The look was not friendly. It was the same look had seen from many of the alien cadets. They saw humans as weak, primitive, barely qualified to be here. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago, and humans were still considered newcomers who had gotten lucky. In the cafeteria, grabbed a tray of human-compatible food. The Academy did its best to feed everyone, but human food was basic compared to some of the exotic dishes other species required. He sat at one of the few tables designed for human-sized beings. Most furniture on the station was built for larger species. At the next table, a group of cadets was discussing the day's training schedule. Were popular in the academy because they were natural soldiers. They had been fighting wars across the galaxy for thousands of years before humans had even invented the wheel. Their instructor was legendary for his combat experience. Hand-to-hand combat today, one of them was saying, cross-species sparring. Had heard about these training sessions. The Academy believed that future galactic defenders needed to understand how different species fought. Some species relied on their natural weapons like claws or stingers. Others used their size and strength. Each species had evolved their own fighting style based on their biology and home world. Humans were often paired with larger, stronger species during these exercises. The instructor said it was to teach humans how to fight opponents who had natural advantages. Suspected it was more about showing the other species how easily they could beat humans. After breakfast, made his way to Training Hall 7. The space was huge, with high ceilings and padded floors. Different areas were marked off for different types of combat training. Some areas had obstacles for urban warfare simulation. Others had different gravity settings to match various worlds. Instructor stood in the center of the hall. He was a massive from decades of real combat. His 4 arms were crossed as he watched the cadets file in. When everyone had arrived, he began speaking in his deep, gravelly voice. "Today we practice restraint techniques," announced. "In real combat, you will not always want to kill your opponent. Sometimes you need prisoners. Sometimes you need information. Sometimes you are dealing with civilians who are confused or scared." Listened carefully. Restraint techniques were actually something humans were good at. Earth had a long history of police work, riot control, and non-lethal combat, but he doubted the other species knew that. "You will be paired with someone from a different species," continued. "The exercise is simple. Subdue your opponent without causing permanent injury. Use your species' natural advantages, but remember the goal is control, not destruction." The instructor began calling out pairs, watched as different species were matched up. A tall was paired with a short, stocky. 2 aquatic deepers were given a water-filled combat area. The mismatches seemed intentional, designed to force creative thinking. Called out, "You are paired with of the warrior caste." Looked across the hall and saw approaching. That was even more impressive up close. His chitinous armor was dark green with natural patterns that spoke of high status among his people. His primary arms ended in hands that looked like they could crush steel. His secondary arms were smaller but still stronger than human arms. Looked down at with obvious disappointment. This was probably seen as an easy victory. Humans were soft, small, and had no natural weapons or armor. They were famous for coming from a death world, but most species assumed that was just political classification inflation. "You are the savage?" asked in accented but clear standard Galactic. His voice carried the clicking undertones common to his species. Had heard humans called that before. Savage was a common term other species used for humans. It was not meant as a compliment. To most galactic citizens, humans were primitive barbarians who had somehow stumbled into. He replied simply. Made a sound that might have been laughter. "This will be quick. Try not to break too easily, soft skin." The other pairs were already taking their positions in the marked combat areas, and moved to an open space marked with yellow lines. The floor was padded, but doubted it would help much if decided to throw him around. Instructor walked between the pairs, checking positions and reminding everyone of the rules. "Remember," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "this is about technique, not brute force. Use your minds as well as your bodies." Settled into a ready position. It was not the standard academy stance they had been taught. Instead, it was something from his old training on Earth. His feet were positioned for quick movement. His hands were loose but ready. Most importantly, his mind was calm. Took a much more aggressive stance. His primary arms were extended, ready to grab and crush. His secondary arms were positioned to block any attacks might try. His posture showed complete confidence in his ability to dominate the smaller human. Around them, other pairs were beginning their matches. The sounds of combat filled the hall: grunts, impacts, the scrape of claws on armor, the splash of water from the aquatic area. Focused on his opponent, was clearly planning to use his reach advantage and natural strength to end this quickly. The stance suggested he would try to grab and use his superior leverage to force a submission. It was exactly what would have expected from someone who had never fought a human before. "Begin," shouted. Moved forward with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. In his mind, this was not really combat training. This was a demonstration, a chance to show the other species what happened when primitive savages tried to stand against evolved warriors. They had been bred for war. His people had conquered 17 star systems before humans had even discovered fire. His chitinous armor was not just decoration. It was living tissue that could deflect plasma bolts and resist most bladed weapons. His primary manipulators could exert enough pressure to crush most metals. His secondary arms were fast enough to catch projectiles in flight. What did this human have? Soft pink skin that looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. Thin limbs with no visible muscle mass. No claws, no armor, no natural weapons of any kind. The only thing remarkable about humans was their reputation for coming from a dangerous world, but had looked up Earth's classification. Class 12 sounded impressive until you realized it was mostly dangerous because of weather and primitive animals. Had fought on 17 different worlds. He had faced creatures that breathed fire, predators that could phase through solid matter, and warriors who could control gravity with their minds. A soft mammal from a backwater planet was hardly worth his attention. As he approached, was already planning his next few moves. The human was standing in some kind of defensive position, but it looked wrong compared to the standard academy stances. His feet were too close together, his arms positioned strangely. Probably some primitive fighting style from his. The plan was simple and elegant. Would grab the human by his ridiculous head fur and use it as a control point. Controlling an opponent's head crest was the ultimate dominance display. It showed that you were so superior that you could control your enemy's most vital area without fear of retaliation. Humans had this strange fur growing from the top of their heads, had seen it in the Academy databases, and wondered what possible evolutionary purpose it could serve. It seemed to serve no protective function and would only give opponents something to grab in combat, perfect for his purposes. Once he had control of the human's head, could force him to the ground and pin him there. The match would be over in seconds. The other cadets would see that humans were as weak as everyone suspected. The instructors would understand that humans needed much more basic training before they could spar with real warriors. Extended his primary right manipulator as he moved within reach. The human's strange stance had not changed. If anything, seemed to have relaxed even more. His hands were loose at his sides, his breathing was steady, and his eyes were focused but not tense. It was the look of someone who had already given up, had seen it before in opponents who realized they were completely outmatched. The smart ones surrendered early to avoid unnecessary pain. Perhaps this human was smarter than his primitive appearance suggested. But surrender was not allowed in academy training. The exercise would continue until one combatant was properly subdued, would make it as quick and painless as possible. Despite what some species thought, they were not needlessly cruel. They were warriors, not sadists. Around them, other matches were continuing with varying degrees of success. The was trying to use his flight capability against but the heavy world native kept grabbing his legs and pulling him down. The two deepers were engaged in some kind of underwater wrestling that involved techniques could not begin to understand. Most interesting was the match between two. They moved like dancers, each attack flowing into the next defense, their four arms creating a complex pattern of strikes and blocks. It was beautiful to watch and reminded why we're considered the finest warriors in the galaxy. Compared to that display of martial skill, this match with the human would be embarrassingly simple. Reached for his hair with his primary manipulator. The strands were darker than most human fur he had seen in the databases, cut shorter than some, but still long enough to provide a good grip. His hand was large enough to encompass the entire top of the human's head if necessary. The human did not flinch as the chitinous hand approached. He did not try to duck or dodge. He simply stood there, watching with those strange round eyes. Maybe he was frozen with fear. Some species had that reaction when faced with overwhelming force. Felt a moment of disappointment. He had hoped the human would at least try to fight back. A complete surrender would not be very educational for either of them. The Academy wanted them to learn about interspecies combat, not just demonstrate dominance. But orders were orders. The exercise was to subdue the opponent, not to give them a fair chance. If the human was not going to defend himself, that was his choice. His fingers closed around his hair. The texture was strange, softer than head crests, but somehow more flexible. His grip was firm but not crushing. He intended to use the hold to guide the human to the ground, not to cause actual injury. The moment his hand made contact, everything changed. Had been in hundreds of combat situations. He prided himself on his reaction time and situational awareness. Among the warrior caste, he was considered exceptionally fast and observant. His reflexes had saved his life on multiple occasions. But he never saw the human move. One moment was standing passively, allowing himself to be grabbed. The next moment, something hit his extended arm with tremendous force. The impact was precise, targeted, and devastating. The human's hand had somehow moved from his side to his elbow joint in less time than it took to blink. It was not a wild swing or desperate flailing. It was a perfectly controlled strike that hit exactly the right spot with exactly the right amount of force. Felt his elbow joint separate with a wet popping sound that echoed across the training hall. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. His natural armor, designed to protect against claws and crushing attacks, had provided no protection at all against the precisely placed blow. His primary arm bent backward at an angle that was impossible for anatomy. The joint was not just damaged, it was completely destroyed. Fragments of cartilage and bone scattered as the arm folded in on itself. A roar of pain and shock filled the training hall. Other matches stopped as cadets and instructors turned to see what had happened. The sound was unlike anything most of them had heard before, a warrior cast in genuine agony. Immediately stepped back, his hands raised in a gesture that somehow recognized as peaceful despite the pain clouding his vision. The human's face showed what appeared to be genuine concern and regret. "Medical," shouted in standard Galactic. "I need medical assistance here." Stared at his ruined arm, then at the human who had somehow destroyed it with a single movement. The soft, primitive savage who was supposed to be easy prey had just inflicted an injury that would require surgery and months of rehabilitation to heal. How was that possible? The human had not used any weapons. He had not called upon any special technology or alien abilities. He had simply moved his hand in a way that turned his soft mammalian limb into a devastating weapon. Felt his worldview cracking along with his elbow joint. Everything he thought he knew about humans, about combat, about the natural order of species, was suddenly in question. Around them, the training hall had fallen silent except for labored breathing and the approaching footsteps of medical personnel. Every eye in the room was focused on the impossible scene. A massive warrior cradled a destroyed arm while a small human stood nearby, looking genuinely sorry for what he had done. The savage had just savaged the warrior, and somehow that was not the strangest part of what had just happened. The moment chitinous fingers closed around his hair, something deep and primal awakened in the human's nervous system. It was not thought. It was not decision. It was pure reflex, coded into human DNA by millions of years of evolution on a world where everything wanted to kill you. For most species in the galaxy, grabbing someone's head or hair was a dominance display or a control technique. For humans, it was one of the most threatening things another being could do. Throughout human history, predators had always gone for the head and neck. A hand on the hair meant teeth were coming next. His conscious mind had no time to process what was happening. His body reacted with the speed and precision that had kept his species alive on Earth's deadly continents. Every human carried this response in their nervous system, even if they had never learned to fight. The strike was a perfect knife hand to his extended elbow joint. His hand moved in a blur of motion that covered the distance between his side and the arm in approximately 1/10 of a second. His fingers were locked together, forming a rigid striking surface that concentrated all the force of the blow into the smallest possible area. The target was perfect. Elbow was fully extended, locked in position as he gripped his hair. The joint was under tension from supporting the weight of his massive arm. When strike hit the back of the elbow, the result was catastrophic. The sound that filled the training hall was unlike anything most of the alien cadets had heard before. It was the wet, organic crack of biological structures failing under stress. His elbow joint did not just break, it exploded. Cartilage, bone, and fluid scattered as the arm bent backward beyond any possible range of motion. Scream was immediate and piercing. The warrior caste were famous for their pain tolerance, bred and trained to continue fighting even when severely injured. But this was not just pain, it was the complete destruction of a major limb. His primary right manipulator, the hand that could crush steel, now hung useless and twisted at his side. Stepped back immediately, his hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. The strike had been reflexive, but his training kicked in as soon as it was over. His first concern was not his own safety, but getting medical help for his injured opponent. "Medical emergency," he called out in standard Galactic, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent training hall. "Severe joint destruction. I need medical personnel here now." Around them, other matches had stopped completely. Cadets and instructors stared in shock at the scene. The massive warrior was cradling his destroyed arm, his chitinous armor pale with shock. The small human stood nearby, looking genuinely distressed by what had happened. Instructor was the first to move. The old warrior had seen enough combat to recognize a serious injury when he saw one. His 4 arms gestured quickly, sending signals to medical teams stationed around the training hall. "Everyone back," commanded. "Give the medical team room to work." The response was immediate and professional. The Academy's medical staff were trained to handle injuries from dozens of different species. A team of 3 medics rushed to position, their equipment already configured for physiology. The lead medic, a healer caste, quickly assessed the damage. Her delicate fingers probed around the injury while her scanner read internal damage levels. Her whistling speech was too rapid for the universal translators to follow, but her tone was clearly concerned. "Complete joint destruction," she announced to her team. "We need surgical reconstruction and immediate bone grafting. Get him to Medical Bay 7. It has the heavy gravity surgical suite for patients." As the medical team prepared to move, other cadets began to crowd around the scene. Word was spreading quickly through the training hall. A human had just destroyed a warrior with a single strike. It was the kind of thing that would normally be dismissed as impossible. Remained where he was, answering questions from instructor about what had happened. His manner was calm and professional, but those who looked closely could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his eyes kept tracking back too. "It was a reflex," explained quietly. "I did not plan to hurt him that badly. Among humans, grabbing someone's hair is considered an extremely aggressive act. Our bodies respond automatically to that kind of threat." Nodded slowly. They had fought alongside many species over his long career, but he was beginning to realize that humans might be more complex than anyone had assumed. As the medical team lifted onto an anti-gravity stretcher, the injured's eyes found across the crowd. Despite his pain and shock, there was something new in his gaze. It was not anger or hatred. It was recognition. Was a warrior. He understood what had just happened even if others did not. The human had not used trickery or luck. He had demonstrated a level of combat reflex that was simply beyond what most species possessed. The strike had been perfect timed, positioned, and executed with deadly precision. But what impressed most was what came after. Had immediately called for help. He had shown genuine concern for an opponent who had just been trying to dominate him. That combination of lethal capability and instant compassion was something had never seen before. As the stretcher moved toward the medical bay, conversations began breaking out across the training hall. Cadets from different species were trying to process what they had witnessed. Many had never seen a human in combat before. None had expected anything like this. A group of cadets were discussing the biomechanics of the strike. Their species was known for precise movements, but even they were amazed by the speed and accuracy of response. How could a species with such apparently primitive biology move that fast? The cadets were focused on the power of the blow. Their dense, heavy world physiology made them difficult to injure, but they recognized that the same strike that had destroyed elbow could have done serious damage to them as well. Most disturbed were the other cadets. Was not just any warrior, he was from the elite warrior caste, with all the genetic modifications and training that implied. If a human could destroy him so easily, what did that mean for the rest of them? Found himself the center of attention he did not want. Cadets were staring at him with mixtures of fear, respect, and curiosity. Some were keeping their distance, as if he might suddenly attack them as well. Instructor called for order, but it was clear that normal training was over for the day. The atmosphere in the hall had changed completely. What had started as a routine exercise in interspecies combat had become something much more significant. All cadets return to your quarters, announced. Training is suspended pending review of today's incident. As the cadets began filing out, remained behind to give a detailed report to the instructors. He explained exactly what had happened from his perspective, though he was not sure the aliens would understand the biological and psychological factors involved. What he did not tell them was how natural the response had felt. The strike had been as automatic as blinking or breathing. Every human carried that same reflex, that same instant response to threats against their head and neck. It was part of what had kept them alive on a world where everything was trying to eat them. Had just given the galaxy its first real glimpse of what humans were actually capable of when pushed. It would not be the last time the other species were surprised by the supposedly primitive savages from Earth. As he walked back to his quarters, could not shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The careful balance of respect and condescension that other species showed humans was based on assumptions that had just been shattered. Soon, everyone would know that humans were not the harmless primitives they appeared to be. They were something much more dangerous and much more valuable as allies. The medical bay buzzed with activity as teams worked to save S's arm. The surgical suite designed for physiology hummed with advanced equipment, but even with all their technology, the doctors were struggling with the extent of the damage. The human strike had not just broken bones, it had completely destroyed the joint structure in a way that seemed almost surgically precise. Dr. K, the chief medical officer, had seen combat injuries from across the galaxy. He had treated warriors wounded by plasma weapons, victims of dimensional tears, and soldiers who had survived direct hits from antimatter charges. But he had never seen anything quite like this. The joint destruction is complete, he explained to his surgical team. But notice how precisely targeted the damage is. The surrounding tissue is barely bruised. The blood vessels are intact. The nerve pathways are undamaged except where the joint itself was destroyed. His assistant, a young healer caste, looked puzzled. How is that possible? If the strike was powerful enough to destroy the joint, shouldn't there be more collateral damage? Dr. K paused in his preparation to consider the question. That would normally be true, but this suggests the human knew exactly where and how to strike for maximum damage with minimum effort. The precision required for this kind of injury is extraordinary. Meanwhile, in the Academy's administrative section, a very different kind of analysis was taking place. Instructor sat across from Academy Commandant, a wise old crystalline whose transparent form shifted colors as she processed information. Explain to me again how a first-year human cadet completely disabled a warrior caste, Commandant said, her voice carrying the musical tones that indicated serious concern among her species. Had fought alongside humans before during his long military career, but only briefly and in large unit actions where individual capabilities were less obvious. He was beginning to realize that the Academy's assessment of human combat potential had been seriously inadequate. The human called it a reflex, reported. He claimed that grabbing hair is considered an extremely aggressive act among his species, and that their bodies respond automatically to such threats. His crystalline form shifted to a deep blue, indicating deep thought, automatic response, without conscious decision. That appears to be correct. The strike occurred within approximately 1/10 of a second of contact. No known species has conscious reflexes that fast. This was troubling news for the Commandant. The Academy's training programs were carefully designed around each species' natural capabilities and limitations. If humans possessed reflexes that operated below the level of conscious thought, it would require a complete revision of their training protocols. What do we know about human evolutionary history? Asked. Consulted his data pad. The file on human biology was surprisingly thin for a species that had been admitted to the Academy. There is classified as a Class 12, but that classification was based primarily on environmental hazards. The biological survey focused on the planet's dangerous wildlife, not on how that environment might have shaped human evolution. Form shifted to yellow, indicating growing alarm. You mean we have been training a species whose combat reflexes we do not understand, based on incomplete biological data? Before could answer, his communicator chimed with an urgent message from the medical bay. Dr. K was requesting immediate access to human anatomical and evolutionary data. The surgical team needed to understand how humans moved and struck in order to properly repair the damage to his arm. "Patch me through to medical," ordered. Dr. K's voice came through the communication system with obvious frustration. "Commandant, I need detailed information about human combat techniques. This injury pattern makes no sense based on what I know about human biology." "What exactly are you seeing, Doctor?" "The strike appears to have targeted the weakest point of joint structure with perfect precision, but according to our files, humans have never encountered anatomy before today. How could the cadet know exactly where to hit?" There was silence in the room as the implications sank in. Humans had somehow instinctively targeted the most vulnerable point of an alien anatomy they had never studied. It suggested a level of anatomical understanding that went beyond simple reflexes. "Doctor," Commandant said carefully, "in your professional opinion, could this have been an accident?" "Absolutely not. The angle, force, and placement were perfect. This was a precisely executed technique designed to cause maximum structural damage with minimum effort. The human would have had to study anatomy for years to achieve this level of precision." Spoke up from his position across from the Commandant. "Unless it was not about knowing anatomy specifically." Both and Dr. K waited for him to continue. "What if humans have an instinctive understanding of how joints work in general? There has thousands of different species, all with different anatomical structures. Perhaps their evolution taught them to recognize and exploit structural weaknesses in any opponent." The idea was deeply unsettling. It suggested that humans were not just reflexively defensive, but instinctively capable of identifying and attacking the weaknesses of species they had never encountered before. Dr. K's voice returned over the communicator. "That would explain the precision. If humans evolved to instantly recognize joint vulnerability patterns across different anatomical structures, they would be naturally capable of targeting the weakest points of any opponent." Commandant's form began cycling through colors rapidly, a sign of intense processing among crystallines. "We need to review all human admissions to the Academy immediately. If they possess these kinds of reflexes and instincts, our current training protocols may be putting other cadets at risk." The conversation was interrupted by another chime from his communicator. This time it was from the training hall, where the remaining cadets were still gathered despite orders to return to quarters. "Sir," came the voice of Assistant Instructor Prex, a nervous young, "we have a situation in the training hall. The other cadets are refusing to leave. They want to know if the human is dangerous." Exchanged a look with Commandant. The question was reasonable, but the answer was complicated. Was dangerous. Clearly he was capable of inflicting serious injury without apparent effort, but was he likely to do so without provocation? "What is the human doing?" asked. "He is still here, sir. He has been trying to calm the other cadets and explain what happened. He seems genuinely upset about injuring." That was consistent with what had observed. Had shown immediate concern for his opponent and had cooperated fully with the investigation. His behavior suggested that the injury had been unintentional, despite its precision. "I am on my way," announced, standing up from his chair. As he prepared to leave the Commandant's office, his form settled into a steady orange, the color of serious decision-making among her people. "Instructor," she said formally, "as of this moment, All human cadets are to be restricted from physical combat training until we can complete a full review of their capabilities. We cannot risk another incident like this. Nodded, understanding the necessity, but also recognizing the larger implications. If humans were removed from combat training, it would effectively end their military careers before they began. The academy existed to train warriors, not desk officers. "What about specifically?" he asked. "He will be placed under observation, pending a complete evaluation. We need to understand exactly what we are dealing with before we can determine how to proceed." As walked back toward the training hall, he found himself thinking about the look in his eyes during the incident. There had been genuine regret there, real concern for his opponent. But underneath that had glimpsed something else, a depth of controlled lethality that he had rarely seen even among veteran warriors. The academy had thought they were training a primitive species in basic combat techniques. Instead, they might have been placing weapons training in the hands of natural killers who were already more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The question now was what to do about it, and whether the other species in the galaxy were ready to learn the truth about their allies. 3 days after the incident, walked quietly through the medical bay corridors towards recovery room. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of meetings, examinations, and evaluations that had turned his simple life as a cadet completely upside down. The academies had spent hours studying human anatomy and evolutionary history. The military psychologists had run countless tests on human reflexes and combat instincts. The administrative staff had held emergency meetings about academy policies and training protocols. Through it all, had cooperated fully, but he could not shake his concern for. They had been trying to dominate him, yes, but the injury that resulted had been far more severe than had intended. His conscious mind had not even been involved in the strike that had destroyed his opponent's arm. As he approached the recovery room, could hear voices inside. Dr. K was speaking with about the surgery and recovery process. The joint reconstruction was successful, the doctor was saying, but full recovery will take several months of rehabilitation. The precision of the damage actually made our job easier in some ways. We knew exactly what needed to be repaired. Knocked gently on the door frame. Both doctor and patient looked up as he entered. Dr. K nodded politely and excused himself, leaving the two former combatants alone. Was propped up in a medical bed designed for his species' large frame. His right arm was encased in a bioregeneration sleeve that hummed quietly as it worked to rebuild his damaged joint. Despite his injury, his eyes were alert and focused as he studied. "You came to see how I am healing," observed. It was not a question. Nodded and moved closer, but carefully maintained a respectful distance. "I wanted to apologize for the severity of your injury. I never intended for the damage to be that extensive." Was silent for a moment, considering his words. The past few days had given him time to think about what had happened, and his perspective had changed considerably from his initial shock and pain. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said finally. "I underestimated you completely. I treated you as prey when I should have recognized a fellow predator." The word choice was interesting. Had heard humans called many things by other species savages, primitives, barbarians, but never predators. "I have been speaking with the doctors and instructors," continued. "They have been researching your species since our encounter. What they discovered is illuminating." Waited for him to continue, uncertain where this conversation was leading. "Your has over 8 million different species, all competing for resources and survival. Most worlds have perhaps a few 100,000 species at most. Earth forced your people to become the ultimate generalists capable of hunting anything, fighting anything, surviving anything." Shifted in his bed, wincing slightly as the movement affected his injured arm. "My people evolved to fight other and the specific predators of our. We are specialists, perfectly adapted to our particular environment. But your species had to be ready for anything. Had never thought about human evolution in quite those terms, but it made sense. Earth's incredible biodiversity had forced humans to develop broad-spectrum survival strategies rather than specialized adaptations. The doctors say that your strike was perfect for destroying any joint structure, not just anatomy, continued. Your people developed fighting techniques that work against any opponent because you never knew what you might face next. The door to the room opened and instructor entered, followed by commandant. Both looked serious but not hostile. "Cadet," commandant said in her musical voice, "we need to discuss your future at the academy." Felt his heart sink. He had been expecting this conversation but dreading it. The academy could not risk having students who were dangerous to their classmates. "However," continued, "before we make any final decisions, we wanted both of you to hear what our research has revealed about human capabilities." She activated a holographic display that showed various data charts and anatomical diagrams. Human reflexes operate approximately 3 times faster than the galactic average. Human pattern recognition for anatomical weak points is virtually instantaneous. Human fine motor control allows for precision strikes that most species cannot achieve even with extensive training. The data was impressive, but was not sure if it was helping his case or hurting it. "More importantly," added, "humans show remarkable restraint and ethical behavior even during combat reflexes. Cadet's immediate concern for his welfare, despite having just been attacked, demonstrates emotional control that is extremely rare among warrior species." Spoke up from his medical bed. "If I may, Commandant, I would like to offer my perspective." His crystalline form shifted to an attentive blue. "Please proceed." "In my culture, we have a saying, the most dangerous warrior is the one who does not wish to fight. Cadet could have seriously injured me the moment I approached him in the training hall. Instead, he allowed me to grab him before responding. He used exactly the force necessary to stop my attack and no more. Then he immediately called for medical assistance." The paused, looking directly at. "That is not the behavior of a savage or a primitive. That is the behavior of a warrior who has complete control over his capabilities and uses them responsibly." Commandant's form cycled through several colors as she processed this input. "The Academy Board has reached a decision regarding human training protocols. All human cadets will be reclassified as Hazard Level 9, not because you are uncontrolled, but because you possess capabilities that our previous assessments failed to recognize." Was not sure what that meant for his future. "Will we be removed from the program?" "On the contrary," said with something that might have been a smile, "you will be given specialized training designed to help you understand and control your natural capabilities. The galaxy needs warriors who can face unknown threats, and humans appear to be uniquely suited for that role." Added, "We are also implementing new protocols for interspecies training. No more cross-species sparring without proper preparation and safety measures. What happened here could have been avoided with better understanding on all sides." Shifted in his bed again. "I request permission to continue training with human cadets once I have recovered." All eyes turned to him in surprise. "My injury was the result of my own arrogance and ignorance," he explained. "I learned more about combat in 10 seconds with Cadet than I had in months of previous training. If the galaxy is to face unknown threats, we need to learn from each other's strengths." Over the following weeks, the Academy underwent significant changes. Human cadets were given specialized instruction in controlling their reflexes and understanding their natural capabilities. Other species learned about human psychology and behavior to avoid triggering defensive responses. Most importantly, the Academy's approach to interspecies cooperation evolved from simple tolerance to genuine understanding. Each species brought unique strengths and perspectives that could benefit the others. Continued his training, but with a new awareness of his own capabilities and responsibilities. He learned to channel his reflexes constructively and to help others understand human nature without fearing it. Recovered fully and became one of the strongest advocates for human inclusion in the academy. His arm bore permanent scarring from the injury, but he considered it a valuable reminder about the dangers of underestimating others. The incident became part of academy legend, told to new cadets as an example of why respect and understanding were essential in a diverse military force. The galaxy was vast and full of unknown dangers. Having allies who could face anything with lethal precision and ethical restraint was not a liability. It was exactly what they needed. When graduated from the academy 2 years later, he did so as part of the first fully integrated interspecies unit in galactic history. Humans were no longer seen as primitive savages who had gotten lucky. They were recognized as one of the most valuable military assets in known space. But more than that, they were respected as beings who could be trusted with tremendous power because they understood the responsibility that came with it. In a galaxy full of warriors, humans had found their place not just as fighters, but as the ones other species could count on to do the right thing even when no one was watching. The soft-skinned savages from Earth had become something the galaxy had never seen before, the perfect combination of lethality and morality, and everyone was safer because of it.